Welcome back, everyone, to another Cybersecurity Pocket Edition workshop by the Q Project. Today, we're going to be giving somewhat of just an informative lesson on what data privacy is, and then we'll talk about how this relates to some new privacy acts that California is looking to pass in November. So, to start off, what is data privacy? Data privacy is a branch of data security, and it's just concerned with how data is handled and how to properly handle it for consumers. So if we look at the differences between the two terms, on the left here, data privacy is something where it's just like a government regulation. It's governing how data is collected and how it can be used and shared. And companies have to go through these laws and regulations, otherwise they receive fines and other sorts of things. Data security, on the other hand, is what it means for our data to, or a company to protect their data to prevent malicious users from getting it. So these companies have to introduce security into their systems in their company that helps prevent unauthorized access. So really, data security is about preventing access to the data, while data privacy is about ensuring that data security is there so that your data isn't being compromised. And data privacy also deals with allowing the consumer to know what data these companies have on it so that you can tell it what you might not want them sharing. And so, why is data privacy important? Most people hear it's important, but they don't really know why. The main reason is that companies should be transparent. Nowadays, more are starting to be, but it's come a lot because of regulations. Companies don't really want to do this on their own as a big company. And that's because data is their most valuable asset. If we look at Google and Facebook, they're, they made a switch years ago to where data was now their source of revenue. You can see that Google and Facebook, they own all these services, but the data they collect is what makes them revenue because they can take that data, sell it to advertisers, and make their revenue and their money for the year. So these companies, they rely on our data to fund their company. Otherwise, they would fail. So it's a catch 22 because there's people that don't want companies having any data, but if they don't have data, we don't get to use their service for free. It would be paid services because our data allows these services to be free. But we also have to remember that the data they have on us is our own individual data. They store data like our names, addresses, but then even more detailed stuff like internet, networking activity, all that stuff. And that's details from us that we're allowing them to use and then to sell. Yeah, and like IP addresses as well, which is part of networking. And so since this is our data that they're storing to sell, we should have a say as the consumer is what regulation is starting to realize. And so back in 2018 in the midterm elections, Californians passed the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. This took kind of all the great elements of there is a privacy act in Europe that was passed, which allowed consumers a say in their data and what they wanted shared, what they didn't. And California, being the largest state in the US, went forth in 2018 and passed this act because it sets precedent for the rest of the states to eventually allow consumers details about what companies hold on them and all that. So this CCPA, it's a regulation that requires these companies to be transparent with us, the consumer, and they have to inform us of where personal data about us is being sent and who they're selling it to, so all that. And we can give them the right to sell that data or to tell them not to. So what consists of personal data? I mentioned a few, and this is a bigger list, but there's a lot more. So names, addresses, social security, email addresses, your online account names, online handles, We talked about IP address, search history. Companies hold search history from the very beginning. I won't be able to show a demo of that, but a few months ago I had downloaded my data from Google, and they had my search history from Google as well as my YouTube search history and every video I've watched since I've opened that account, which was like over 10 years ago. So it's a little crazy to think that these companies just hold that data. Most of the time, they're not going to use it for anything. Like it's not meant for harm, but it's just they hold the data. And before, at the beginning, we weren't able to see that they had these type of data on us. And going on from there, biometric data, geolocation data. This is more prominent on mobile devices. So when you're taking your phone around and you're logging in with your fingerprint scanner or your face unlock features and all that, it's storing this data, and these companies are storing that data on their servers, as well as your geolocation. Anytime you move locations, they're storing where you're going so they can try and sell this information to advertisers so they can better send ads to you. Audio, visual, electronic, thermal information. So a good example of, I guess, like audio is when you use OK Siri or Hey Google or Hey Alexa. All those audio recordings are saved in the company's database because they use that to better program their AIs and all that. So it's for their benefit, but they're also storing data that most people would assume that maybe they aren't storing your voice recordings of you asking Google a question. And professional employment information, education information, those are two big sectors where data is stored all over the place, or not all. That's a wrong term. It's stored in those companies, but they need to make sure that it's safe so that other people can't access it. And so, with the CCPA, who's affected? It's any company dealing with a California. I put citizen, but it should be resident. And so, anyone dealing with California residents has to abide by the CCPA if they're making these things, such as 25 million or more. They hold more than 50,000 users or devices in their databases, and they make more than 50% revenue from selling data, which means that the companies affected are companies that use their consumer to make money based on the data, such as Google, Facebook being big examples. And the best thing about this CCPA law, as well as the European one that was introduced before, was that these are universal rules. So if a company from Australia wants to provide services to California residents, they have to abide by these laws. Otherwise, they'll be fined by California if they do not abide by it. And so, what are some of the central points in this act? The main one is right to know. Since it was introduced in 2018 in California and it went into effect around 2019, us, the consumer, now have the right to know what data a company has on us. That's why you can now go on a website or log into your account and say, download my data, and they have to provide it to you and show you what data they have on you. You also have the right to delete your data. You can tell Google, I do not want you having this data on me, and they have to remove it from their database. It's a little sketchy. Like, I won't go into the details of how that's done. Sometimes they put up barriers to try and like prevent you from wanting to delete data. But ultimately, this allows you to delete your data if you don't want them having it. Non-discrimination is another big one that needed to be included with it. Was it doesn't give the company ability to discriminate. So if I call up Facebook and tell them that I don't want them selling my data, they aren't allowed to do anything. They can't treat me differently. Or if I'm going to a business and or such as like an internet provider, and I tell them don't sell my data, they can't charge me more money because I don't want them selling my data. They have to treat everyone equal. And what I didn't include here, also included in the law, is the opt-in and opt-out features. As a consumer, you're allowed to opt out of them selling data. So that's part of this whole thing. You can say, don't sell my data, and they can't sell it. But then as a minor, you can also opt in if you're willing to. So you can, like, if you're 16 and above, you yourself can opt in and say, yes, you can go ahead and sell my data. Like, I'll provide it to you. And then if you're younger than 16, then you have to get parent permission. And so the main compliance of this act for companies is the violations. So depending on the violation, it's somewhere between $100 to $750 per violation. And this is if a company has shown that it allowed data to be disclosed or someone breached their database and stole data. And the great thing about this law that is what it's helping protect us consumers is that the company doesn't, or the consumer doesn't need to prove that anything, like they lost money from it. They just have to say, look, my data was in a data breach. You allowed a data breach to happen, and that's a violation. And so this allows companies to make sure that your data is not being mistreated, because if they have a data breach of 100,000 people, that's $100,000 times at minimum $100 per person per violation. So that's a lot of money going out if people's data isn't protected. And so moving on from CCPA, in November next month, us living in California will be voting on a revision, which is like the CCPA 2020, or they're calling it Prop 24. The goal of this is to revise and refine the CCPA from 2018. And both sides, from my opinion, I went into this when I first read about it thinking that Prop 24 was great all around. But if you read some of the ideas that they have in it, you can see why there's arguments for both sides, even though data privacy should be the most, or the biggest concern for us. So two of the main things that would be introduced from this revision is a consumer protection agency. That means that there's going to be a new agency in California where their whole job is to deal with these data privacy and like violations and all that. So people would be sending to them, and they would be able to treat these violations and find companies and help people do what they need to do. The other one is, with the current implementation, if a company is in violation of something, they can try and resolve it and fix it so they don't get fined. This new revision is going to say companies can't fix a violation. If they allow a data breach, they can't try and fix it with the people. They are going to get fined for it because that's a violation on data privacy. And so going into some more pros and then some cons, another pro is that they want to put more protection on minors. So the mistreatment of a minor's data, where say it's let out or in a data breach or given out wrongly, sell, or if they sell the data without the acknowledgement of the minor, those are 3 times multiple on the fine violation. So it makes companies more willing to make sure minors' data is protected because they don't deserve to have their data mistreated. They don't, like, they're underage. They don't have a representation to vote. Consumers, another pro is that consumers can tell businesses not to sell their data. I believe in the first, what's currently implemented is you can tell companies like, don't sell my data. But now, like with this new revision, you can tell any business if you're signing up or whatever, or come back and tell them, I don't want you selling data, such as like your bank or whatever. You can tell them you don't want your data being sold. And they're also trying to fix some loopholes that prevent influence to where it can weaken these laws in the future. Some of the cons with this from people that are not, that want to vote no, is they're saying that this law became in effect in January 2019. So it hasn't been very long, and that affects small businesses more than big businesses. A large business can deal with this and they can read the new fine print and make sure they adjust. But as a small business, they probably just finally figured out how they can make sure they're not getting fined or causing violations. And then now it's going to be changed again. And that's a lot of money that needs to be spent by a small business that's trying to make sure that they're protecting people's data. Another thing is that some of the wording in the new revision looks like it's going to weaken universal protections. It will allow companies to track your data once you move out of California or once you leave. So if your location's in California, you want to fly to New York for a trip, as soon as you're out of California, these companies can, there's nothing against them beginning to track your data and start selling it again. So some of the fine print needs to be fixed, and that's what people are arguing for. But the biggest concern, which was one that kind of changed my view on this, is the pay for privacy information that's been involved in this new revision. And so in Prop 24, there's a pay for privacy statements around the whole thing. And basically what this is meaning is that companies will have the ability to make consumers kind of pay for privacy, even though it should be free and universal. So one way you could pay is you could say if the company can give you like a basic service, if you allow them to share your data, then you'll be able to get a better service, which is kind of contradictory to what it has right now, which is the non-discrimination. They shouldn't be allowed to change what you get based on their ability to sell your data. But the new wording kind of allows that to happen. And another thing is that the biggest issue that I see is companies will be allowed to charge for additional protection. This is great for companies, and this is probably why they wanted the revisions, is a large company like Google and Facebook or AT&T, they want to help provide privacy for your data, but that costs them money, and so they want to put a price on it. A few years ago, I think it was 2017, AT&T attempted to make a additional service where it was a $39 extra fee per month for internet, and they would make sure your data was all protected and more secure than the rest of the people. But that is not right because it doesn't allow underrepresented people and lower income families to support themselves with the privacy. So pay for privacy in its sense is good for those that can pay for it, but as a low income family, you can't pay for extra privacy. So that means that you're defaulted to lower privacy of your data. And that, in my opinion, isn't correct to do as a company. So, and with that, that's kind of just an overview of what California's privacy acts are like and what's coming up in November. If you're voting in November, you should read more about the Privacy Act to see whether you're going to vote yes or no on it. And there's 2 links here for our Cat Life page and our YouTube page. To stay up to date with us, you can check those out to see our old workshop videos and all that. Here are where I got most of my sources from. And with that, thank you, and the workshop's now over, unless there are any questions. So if there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If not, we'll end the recording.
I have a question. So there was this thing around a couple of years ago. It was this really big like data privacy kind of thing. I forgot what it's called. Like there's this big court case on it.
Yeah.
Basically they would give less internet to some people or something like that for certain things.
Was this dealing with net neutrality?
Yeah, net neutrality. Does that have anything to do with data privacy?
I would say it's concerned with data privacy because net neutrality was the idea that companies can benefit certain services. So if AT&T had a partnership with Netflix, it could allow more bandwidth for Netflix over its connections, like compared to like Hulu, which for the consumer, like you shouldn't have to worry about my internet provider not giving me a consistent speed for whatever service I use. That was like the idea with net neutrality. The idea with these privacy acts is that they the large companies, which doesn't benefit us as a consumer, they want to implement pay for privacy. So they want, like AT&T would be able to give a base plan where it's like, this is the base plan, but if you don't want us to sell data, or you want us to put your data in like a more encrypted database, you can pay a fee for that. And in the sense of low income families not being able to support that, that shouldn't be done.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, okay, so I think we're gonna end the workshop right here.